Welcome to Inside Plug, the podcast where independent creators and entrepreneurs connect and inspire. I'm your host, Devon Jones. Today on our show, we have writer, director, and editor Harry Waldman. Harry, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's awesome to be here.
Harry, so I've been following you for a little while and you've been on a roll. Your films has just been winning awards left and right. But before we dabble into your films and your projects, let's talk about Harry as a filmmaker. When do you aspire to become a filmmaker?
I always love this question. It is a bit of a long story. I'll try not to make it too long, but my love for films started from as long as I can remember. I have memories being 4 years old watching Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. Love the whole film, particularly the opening scene when Harrison Ford's being chased by the boulder in the dungeon. I was so obsessed with that scene that when I would go to my aunt's place, I would find some like big like rubber balls and like they had this staircase and it's not that big, but I was a little kid, so it felt big. I run down the staircase and then I'd like push the ball down and kind of pretend I was Indiana Jones. So a lot of good memories doing that. Some of the other films when I was a little kid, more like elementary school, early middle school, like many, I started with a lot of blockbusters. I love the original Star Wars trilogy, Lord of the Rings, Aliens, the first two Terminator films, The Matrix. But yeah, so anyway, though, so I was really into the blockbusters, but then in middle school, I actually was just having this conversation with another person who's real into film last night. Was when I was in seventh grade, I was at a friend's house and we actually weren't watching it. It was my friend's parents. They're watching a film called Memento, which I was not familiar with, by Christopher Nolan, of course. And we sat down partway through it, and as it's a pretty complex film, and especially walking partway through, I was pretty confused, but I was incredibly intrigued, particularly with the twist at the end. Anyway, fast forward 2 years later, and I'm in a Blockbuster back when those still existed, and I see the film Memento, and I think, oh yeah, like I'd been meaning to see that again. So I rented it out for I think it was like a week, and I watched it every night for 5 nights in a row. And it took me 3 times to watch it, plus doing some research on the internet, and then the whole story finally clicked, and that was the first film that truly blew my mind. Just everything about it, even aside from the twist, the strength of the characterizations, the writing, the way in which it's structured, just with the colored scenes going backwards, black and white scenes going forward, and how they kind of mesh together at the end. So yeah, that film it kind of showed me the potential of cinema and the fact that it's not super low budget, but it's not this gigantic blockbuster budget type of film. That was kind of my first introduction to like, oh, hey, you don't necessarily need to be born into this, to actually make it. But anyway, so fast forward a couple of years, I had seen Batman Begins in theaters, and I was a giant fan of that. I'd watched a couple of the previous Joel Schumacher Batman films, which they're a lot of fun, a little campy. I like the darker, more serious tone that came from this film. But anyway, when the credits roll, I see Christopher Nolan's name, and that was kind of when I started to follow him and then many directors to follow and started to do research and, kind of see, oh yeah, the director, more often than not, they have a lot of say in how the film gets made. And that was a position that kind of interested me from a young age. Anyways, so with that all being said, I always liked watching movies. It was always one of my favorite hobbies, but I suppose I get it from my grandpa. He was a more practical kind of 2 + 2 = 4 kind of guy. Um, and an incredibly generous guy, helped out with college for me. So he definitely had an influence. And since he was a business guy and I didn't really know what I wanted to do, I didn't think whether it was filmmaking or video games or music or sports, etc. Those were my main hobbies, but couldn't really fathom actually making a living in those industries. So he first suggested accounting. I ended up studying marketing, got an MBA in college, and looking back, I am glad I got the MBA just because it taught me how to be a leader. I've learned producing on film sets. I learned a lot of valuable information, but a lot of the actual content just didn't interest me very much. I found myself sitting on my laptop playing games during class and school, not paying attention. I was doing enough to get by to getting B's and B pluses, but I didn't really care about the content. And I was in this mindset of I'm going to graduate college, I'm going to have a 9 to 5 job. It's going to be, pretty depressing, but it is what it is. And let's just try to keep my mind off it. So anyway, fast forward to I have less than a semester left, my senior year of college, and I have this dream. And I mean, I generally I've definitely had some pretty potent visceral dreams, but this is the one that I'll remember the most. And this one actually is a lot less crazy than I've had a lot of other dreams running around, like trying to avoid death, like getting in crazy fights and stuff. This dream wasn't that at all. All this dream was I was a film student at a prestigious film school. I was taking all these different film courses, and it was just crazy how real it felt and how right everything felt. And I wake up and I jump out of my bed, and I was so into the dream that the transition from being in my dream world to being in the real world did not hit me right away, which has never happened before and never happened since. Like every time the dreams ended, I always could tell right away, okay, that was a dream. So I think I have a film class to go to. So I get up and I run to the front door and grab my backpack and bag and jacket. And suddenly I realize, you're not a film student, you're not going to film class, you're not making films, you're a business student, and I guess you're just gonna have some boring business job that you hate for the rest of your life. So I kind of stopped out of my tracks. I sit on my bed and I just stare at the wall, and that might have been the worst moment of my life. Um, Fortunately, I kind of sit there. I let it simmer, and then a light bulb pops on in my head, and I realize, yeah, it sucks that I figured out what I wanted to do as I was graduating college, especially considering that the college I went to, Ithaca College, has a pretty good film school. Anyway, though, I was only 21 at the time. So it's like, okay, you have plenty of time. You can figure this out. So basically, from that moment on, I graduated school, tried to maintain my grades, started working in finance, did that for a number of years. And then I started to slowly pursue filmmaking. It started with a lot of watching YouTube tutorials online. I read a few books. Then I started networking. I actually bought a cheap camera from Best Buy. That was actually what I made 515 with, the film we were chatting about before, which super fun film. It was tough because I made the whole thing by myself, and I ran into so many continuity errors because I was just shooting it in my apartment, and the whole thing takes place in one day, and it took a while to shoot. So my hair length was changing. There was stuff being moved around, so I was constantly reshooting it. It was a mess. But anyway, while I was doing that, I started to get on film sets from the networking events that I'd been a part of. And on one of the first big kind of decent sized film I worked on, I met this guy, Lance, who I'm still close with. He was the producer on the film at the time, and we spent a lot of time together and hit it off. So he started to bring me on his productions. Starting out as a PA, I was helping him with camera and lighting a little bit, doing some assistant work. And all the while, I'd made this film 515, and I was happy with it, but it wasn't really a professional film. It was more a fun, kind of cool amateur film. So I wasn't necessarily, I have it, on my website, but I wasn't necessarily submitting it to festivals and trying to get other online distribution. Anyway, so I write the script for my first professional short film, Enter the Room, and I was very happy with it. But this one, I actually needed a cast and a crew. And with no film background and not really many connections, I had no idea how to make this happen. Fortunately, one day on one of Lance's productions, he asked me to send him the script. So I sent it over to him, not expecting anything. Gets back to me a few days later, said he really likes it, really likes the voices of the characters, and he offers to shoot it and produce it pro bono since I had volunteered on some of his films. So I immediately jumped at the opportunity. I just remember thinking, oh, like this is my break. And what was so important about, I think particularly having him be the producer, was that I had felt at the time, even though I had, aside from the one amateur film, basically no experience, I'd felt like I feel like I can write and I can direct and I can edit based on what I did with 515. But producing was just something I just had no idea. Like, how do you get all these people excited for your project, get them on board, especially when you have a lower budget? So he showed me the ropes. I mean, he got an assistant director on board right away. He posted casting notices. We rented out a theater space one night. We auditioned a bunch of actors. We found two guys, Peter and Rich, the two who ended up, I think, doing a great job in the film. We held a few rehearsals, got a gaffer, sound person, and then, scheduled our shoot days and yeah, got everything done in just 2.5 days, which was awesome because we'd scheduled four. Um, but yeah, so it was so important to see him bring people on board and sell the project. And I basically took what I learned from him and for my next few shorts In the Backseat and Bay for Blood, and then for my feature film, The Corridor Crossing, which is still in post production, I've just kind of slowly expanded on what I've learned from him. And it was really tough at first. In the Backseat was a struggle because it was my first time. But as I've done it, I've gotten more and more comfortable with the process. And yeah, I mean, I've been submitting a few of the shorts to festivals, and it's gone well. It's gone. I was very nervous when I started, but I'm happy with the results. And yeah, that basically brings me to where I am right now.
I love it. I love it. So let's just recap a little bit. So, you watched Momentum, you went to the Blockbuster, you rented it out, watched it 5 days straight, did some research, and then boom, now you have the dream of being a film student. And then at the time you was not a film student, and boom, now you get the light bulb. And then you experiment and create your own film, 515, even though you don't think that it was film festival worthy, you still pursued. And then now you're deciding to, okay, now I need to write my own film. Now, that is amazing within itself because to get all those signs and still move forward, what was it that kept that drive alive? Like, what was it from after 515 to writing your first script?
Oh yeah, of course. A great question. Yeah, I mean, it was it was almost kind of a no-brainer to keep. I guess with me, the number one thing was that I definitely spent a lot of time as a kid. I know I'd mentioned to you, like, I loved watching movies, I like playing video games. I was not very good at sports, but I liked watching sports, and there were a couple sports I was okay at. I'm very into the entertainment industry, big on music too. These were things I enjoyed as a kid, but I still very much felt like an outsider. I had friends, but I found myself hanging out with a lot of them and maybe connecting by playing, a video game or something like that, but mostly feeling like an outsider, feeling lost, not paying attention in class. Nothing ever felt right. And with film, it was when I made 515, it was particularly when I edited, which editing is actually a part of what I currently do for a living, in addition to the filmmaking. I do a lot of post production. Um, anyway, though, was just and it all clicked. And I won't pretend like, I mean, filmmaking, it's so hard. Of course, like anyone else, I definitely have weaknesses. When I made 515, I struggled with the cinematography. Um, and just other certain things, continuity, logistics. Um, but it was, once I had finished it, I'm used to when I make something, it goes a lot worse than I hope, especially when I was younger. And with the film, not that it's the best, but when I was starting, I was just worried like this won't even look like a film. This will, especially because I'm making it by myself with literally a budget of, I mean, the budget was basically the camera, which was like a couple $100s. It was a very cheap camera. I was using a iMovie free editing software, so everything was shot in my apartment. Excuse me. I think what kept me going was just that it's, of course, I want to make it like everyone else, but I was just so fixated on the fact that everything felt right, and I felt like I was floating on air. And that's what kept me going. And with Enter the Room, I was a little nervous that that might stop once I worked with other people, but it's really just been, of course, it's stressful, and of course, you hit road bumps, but I'd say 90% of the time, I'm just in a way better mood when I have a film in production than when I don't. So that's what made it so easy for me to keep going.
Awesome, awesome. All right, so then now let's talk a little bit about Into the Room. If you can share a little bit about it, what's the film about?
Absolutely. So, yeah, Enter the Room is probably my most personal film to me, definitely for my shorts. it is actually loosely based on a relationship I had with a roommate my freshman year of college. Excuse me. Um, so about 80 to 90% of the various things that Brian, the neurotic character who wears the hat and the V-neck, is accusing his roommate Jeremy of, those were actual things that my roommate accused me of. We just we didn't mesh well. I don't want to point the finger, but I would definitely say he was a bit uptight. I can be a bit neurotic, but he was kind of on a different level. Um, so there was this real tension between us, and it did lead to this big argument before he ended up moving out. So yeah, it was Enter the Room. It started based on that, but once I had written about half the script, and I thought, okay, this is pretty cool. These are interesting characters. There's a lot of tension, but I want to take it a step further. So I figured, why not make the characters brothers? Why not give them this kind of nasty past relationship, a past traumatic event that sort of led to where they are today, to sort of put the finishing touches on, which I didn't realize at the time, but actually, I think whatever happened to Baby Jane had a large influence on the film. Um, so yeah, that's it, that's basically the gist of it. And yeah, it's a film I really care for, and I think it is mainly because it's, heavily based on things I experienced in my past.
Awesome, awesome. That's great. Because a lot of great films are, when they can be personal, they end up being, the better of, the portfolio of films that a filmmaker has. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Also, you mentioned you have a production company, Edgewater Film Productions.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically, I started it around, I'd say I got very serious with it when I started the production for In the Backseat. But I had basically, when I made Enter the Room, I still didn't really know what I was doing. And my friend Lance, who he runs a production company called Bridgeport Film Club that's been around for a while. And he kind of first, gave me the, because when we had Enter the Room in production, I didn't have Edgewater Film Productions as my name. He kind of gave me that pointer, and I just went with it from there. I originally created a website through GoDaddy. I moved to another website that I mean, GoDaddy was fine. I prefer the website I've moved over to recently. Yeah, and I mean, I've just been slowly trying to build the brand since. Yeah.
Awesome. And with that, how important would you say it is for a filmmaker to have a website to showcase their work, or is it needed?
I think it's vital unless you are, and there's nothing wrong with this. If you just make your stuff for you and you truly don't care about getting it out there and people seeing it, more power to you. Um, but if you're like most people where, I mean, they're all varying levels. Not to say every person's like, oh, I need to go to Hollywood, because that's not necessarily my dream. However, I really do want as many people to see my work as possible. And when people Google my name, Google my company, that as much content as possible comes up. That's really important to me. And with the power of the internet, it's just a lot easier to do that. And I just think with submitting to festivals, also with bringing people onto your film, especially if it's lower budget, and I think things like that can be great selling points, is just having a professional website, that looks good but also helps you stand out. I think most importantly, conveys who you really are. Like my website is not, I don't think it's the most conventional looking. It's, a little uh, darker background, a lot of like bright flashy colors. It it isn't necessarily everyone's cup of tea, but I think that it showcases who I am, and the type of films I make. And that's where I think when hiring people, it doesn't always work out, but generally the people who come in and interview for me or audition for me, they seem to be into the same type of stuff I am. And I think that's part of it. Is not only do I think, yeah, it's really vital you have a website, because I've seen some films at festivals where they don't, and I can't find anything. And it's very frustrating, because it's like, oh, I would have followed you on Instagram. I would have checked out your website, and I would have, once the film came out online, would have gladly subscribed to the YouTube page, liked it. If you had it on Vimeo Demand, I would have, happy to support indie filmmakers. I would have rented or bought it. So I do think, yeah, if you want people to see your stuff, excuse me, see your stuff, you definitely want to have a website. And I think you want it to properly showcase who you are, so people understand your identity.
Awesome, awesome. And with that, where can people find your work and watch some of your films?
Yeah, of course. So the easiest way to find me, I always just went and down Google everything. My website is called edgewaterfilmproduction.com. If you Google Edgewater Film Productions, my website will show up right away. If you Google Harry Waldman, my name should show up right away. Harry Waldman or Harry Waldman Filmmaker. I've got the website, the YouTube channel, Vimeo page, IMDb, Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads, X, etc. Yeah, and as for my work, I have my trailers and I do have my first short film 515 on my website. As for other works, while Enter the Room, Bay for Blood, and In the Backseat are all on their festival runs, if for anyone that likes my work, my email address is edgewaterfilmproductions@gmail.com. It should be listed on my website and socials. You can always reach out privately to me, and I'd be happy to send a private link. And of course, once the festival runs are over, I don't have specific distribution plans in store, but those three shorts will likely end up on my YouTube channel and Vimeo page.
Awesome, awesome. And we'll get that link to the website and we'll have it in the description so you filmmakers out there can check it out. All right, so Harry, when you're not writing the script or directing a project or even editing in post-production, what do you like to do in your free time when you just want to unwind and kind of relax?
Course. Number one, maybe not the most unpredictable, but it is it is watching stuff on TV. It's actually shifted a little. I still do usually watch at least a movie a day, but I've gotten very into television. I would still say film is my first love. Part of the problem is I've watched so many films and there still are enough new ones coming out each year that I'm actually still getting caught up on 2023 stuff. But whereas with television, I very loosely dabbled in it until recently, and I've gotten very into not only live action TV, I've gotten real into anime too, and that has been quite the wormhole. There's just an infinite number of anime shows. So yeah, it's a lot of watching movies and TV, but then in addition to that, I would say I'm not as big on it, but I am still a decently big guy on watching sports. I don't play as many sports. I think I'm gonna do a kickball league this spring, but nothing too serious. Um, but yeah, I'm a big fantasy football nut. I love March Madness, which is coming up soon. In addition to that, I mean, I live in Chicago. I just love exploring the city. I love trying out new restaurants with friends. Every now and then I like going to bars too. Yeah, and then I guess one last thing is it's been on and off, but I've gone through periods of being obsessed with roller coasters. When I was a little kid, I wanted to be a roller coaster designer before I found film. I ended up later learning that it was not only are there very few jobs, the way my brain works, I probably would not be a good fit to be a roller coaster designer. But I was obsessed with them as a kid, and I actually sort of revisited that passion over the last few years. Although I'm starting to burn out on that a little, so I may take a little break from that. But I have gone to a handful of theme parks the last few years, kind of all over the country.
Nice, nice. Could you share with us what is your favorite roller coaster at your theme park?
So my favorite roller coaster period is Steel Vengeance at Cedar Point in Sandusky, Ohio. They're kind of the king of theme parks. When I was a little kid, Magnum XL 2000, I believe that's the name, or 200. That was my favorite one at the park, and I went back a couple summers ago, and now that one's only like middle pack. Um, yeah, I would say Steel Vengeance for, I mean, favorite at the park I'm at. So I'm near Six Flags, Illinois Gurney. I would say Goliath, which is a not super new, but that's a pretty strong one. Newer-ish, like 2015, I think it came out. But yeah, and I could go on and on about roller coasters, but those are a few of my favorites.
Awesome, awesome. All right, so we're at that point of the session where I ask this question to all the guests. What is a TV show, a film, or a book that you recommend to aspiring filmmakers?
So I think, all right, I'll say, even though for me it was Memento was my film because kind of as I explained, the fact that Nolan relied so heavily on writing, characterization, um, direction, and actual storytelling versus effects. I do think that that is a good starter, especially if someone's younger and they haven't expanded their horizon as much. That they've mainly watched blockbusters just because I love Lord of the Rings as much as anyone, but to think you can just jump out of school and make Lord of the Rings is just about impossible. Um, but yeah, so I think Memento's a good starter film as long as someone's into that sort of darker, twistier type of film. For television, I assume the budget was not small, but still probably my favorite television show of all time. I'm going through it again right now, is Breaking Bad. That's another one that, well, again, I mentioned, I don't know the budget. I'm sure it's not small, but I think in general, when you're an aspiring filmmaker, now there are exceptions because I've definitely seen some low budget horror films that look incredible. So there always are exceptions, but unless you have that like rare talent, I personally think it's really difficult to make a film on a really low budget look really good, unless again you have somebody who's like a master of lighting, a master of set design, a master of music, cinematography, etc. So I've always started with in my films. I've tried to expand in other areas, but I rely so much on the script and on the characters. That's those are the two things I really I feel like with Enter the Room, I mean, it's just shot in my kind of plain looking apartment and there are technical issues and I've gotten feedback on that, but people have generally responded very well and that's because they like the actors. They can relate to the tension between living with someone you grind gears with. So anyway, so yeah, the reason I bring up Breaking Bad is just because it's all the technicals are great, but it's one of those shows it's not flashy, but it's just Walter White, I think, is maybe the most interesting character I've ever seen in a TV show. His arc is truly phenomenal, and just all the characters, the writing, the direction, the storytelling in general, it's just done at the highest level. So I think that, and while I think many filmmakers have already seen Breaking Bad, I can't say enough good things about that show. And just to show that I'm all about flash, like sci-fi is my favorite genre, and and sci-fi stuff tends to look slick. But I like to think lower budget, focus on story, character, script first, then work on enhancing everything else.
Awesome, awesome. Thanks for sharing that. All right, everyone. That was our episode of Inside Plug. We had writer, director, and editor Harry Waldman. If you loved today's episode, don't forget to check out some of our previous episodes and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Inside Plug with two G's. Harry, thank you for being on. I appreciate hearing your journey and these filmmakers, and they got a long way to go, but if they stick with it, we'll see some great films in the future. Thank you for being here, and I look forward to checking out Into the Room.
Thanks, I appreciate it, and thank you for having me.
All right, that was our episode of Inside Plug. Signing out.